Okay, so you're pulling up those graded essays and I left you a lot of comments on them. So if you turned it in all as one essay, both the personal and the research, you'll just have to go into one. You have to click on, I think, submission details and then view feedback to see all the comments that I gave you. But if all you're seeing on yours is a comment that says, great work, feedback left on submission or whatever, like something like that, then you're not seeing my comments. I did not just write that on all of them. So you can go in and I've given you lots of feedback. Who's already seen that feedback at this point? I don't know if you get notifications for it. Okay, hardly anybody. So I want to give you a couple minutes now to read through that feedback and see what I had to say about your graded essay. And if you can't find where the feedback is, someone near you can show you. I don't get to see the student view that often, so it's hard for me to find it, but someone can help you.
This is an assignment that we started in first quarter and we are almost done with, so I'm just going to excuse it for you.
And if I somehow missed someone's, let me know. And I will get to that. It was hard because I had already given you scores. So if I missed you, it was on accident. Same text. What do you mean? Look, come here. Oh. And another example of a graded essay. Yeah. Jack's yours was the Pokemon one, right?
Yeah.
I just started putting a whole bunch of guns like, what? What is that thing?
Like 30% of the comments. Yeah, I probably should change it.
I wanted to just show that like an old person is gonna be reading it for the contest, so an old person like me, and so you've gotta introduce us to things that you might not have to for your peers. Yeah. Oh, will you show me at the end of class? Okay. Oh, one for Luke. Oh, okay. I'll make sure. Remind me at the end of class. I will make sure. Okay, so we are going to talk about the actual grading aspect now a little bit more. I have this essay here. It's not my very favorite essay in the world, but I think it does a good job of showing how to grade an essay. The other thing about it is it's a weird topic. So it is about skinning a bird for scientific purposes. So it's like, it's almost like an instruction manual for somebody who works for like a natural history museum, like figuring out how to display these for scientific purposes. So there's a lot of like description that is like very gruesome, but it's told in this like scientific way. The other thing that's weird about this essay is the topic of it. I need to give like a bit of a warning. The way that it's written, it starts to sound like it's going to get super intense. It doesn't. It's about the writer who has a relationship with her father that is like inappropriate, but not so far inappropriate that we can't just read this in school, if that makes sense. He treats her like a peer or like somebody that he could tell all his problems to, and even like weirdly like a girlfriend, but like not so far that will be disgusted by the end, if that makes sense. I needed to point that out because there's a couple parts that hint at it, but it's like, is she gonna make us read this? I think it'll be okay. Okay, so what I wanna do is I wanna show you how she has done the braiding part. So I'm just gonna read it out loud and we'll go part by part. So it says, your first and only incision will be right over the sternum. All birds have a bald patch there. Blow lightly on the breast until the feathers begin to part and you can see the pale skin beneath. Rest your finger there for a moment. Feel the bone, your blade will follow. Make a wish if you must, and then slice from collar to belly carefully. I used to keep the letters my father had written to me in a box with all of my other letters. There were 3 of them, all written before I was 8 on lined paper with a ripped spiral fringe. He put them into the envelopes he sent my mother. Otherwise, they were empty except for a check, always made out for $75. Sometimes the envelopes came from Alaska or Tahiti. I forgot to press record. Oh no, I am recording. When I was a little older, if I saw the mail before my mother, I would feel the envelopes to see if they were thicker than just a check. You will need to cut the spinal column and trachea before you go any further. To do this, carefully work a small surgical probe beneath the skin and neck muscles at the very top of your cut. The curved tip is blunt, and if you advance it slowly, it shouldn't tear the skin. Work it behind the neck until you see it on the other side, then slide the lower blade of a scissor along the steel. When you can see the scissors point, cut. On larger birds, you may need to cut 2 or 3 times blindly. This is why the probe is important. It keeps you from cutting through the back of the neck and beheading your specimen. I stayed at my father's parents' house a few times as a child, usually when he was visiting too. Even though he had a local apartment twice, I never stayed at either one. In the second apartment, which he took me to once for just a moment, I had my own room. I looked in through the darkened doorway and saw a bed and bedside table, no lamp, and then we had to leave. I never stayed alone with him until I was in college. This doesn't feel ominous, just disconnected. His parents live in a double-wide trailer in the yard of a landlord I never met. I slept in his little brother's old room. Okay, let's look at it so far. So this writer has chosen to keep the braided sections like a little bit different, where it's like the skinning the bird part mixed with the information about her father all in one section. I think it's more effective to break it all up with these little page breaks. These could be called section breaks, but I like the official name for them, which is dingus. What I'm going to have you do, and I'll show you this on the projector, you're going to do 3 little stars centered. That's officially a dingus for any time you're changing the break. So I would actually put those 3 stars after the word carefully and have like another little page break right there, so it's clear how you're going back and forth. But that's a style choice. You can choose to defy me if you want. But let's look at this page break right here, the one that is separated with the star on the first page. What commonalities are there between the story of finding the letters that her father gave her in a box, or keeping them in a box, and like knowing that if there's a letter that he's actually saying something to her rather than just a check, and the next section, which is about cutting the spinal column and the trachea before you go any further? Like, why did she choose to create, to kind of juxtapose those 2 sections together, do you think? Are you seeing any connecting point? It's tough. I think it's like, it feels abrupt. It's going to start to feel a little bit less abrupt by the end, but there is one little thing. She says a paper with a ripped spiral fringe when she's talking about the letters. And then she says you will need to cut the spiral column and trachea in the next part. So when we first were talking about this, I was talking about how there can be words that are repeating between your research section and your personal section. That would be a sort of example. They're not even repeating in the same way. It's not talking about the same thing, but spiral and spinal that have that like kind of sound is similar. It's just this tiny bit of connection between the two. I don't even know that she meant that intentionally, but for the reader, it stands out to me. Okay, let's keep reading. So she's talked about this idea that it doesn't feel ominous that she wasn't allowed to stay, that she didn't stay alone with him until college, just disconnected. And then she goes into the next section that says, after the neck is cut, he will slip the wings from their bones like a jacket. To do this, repeat the following steps for each side. Using your fingers, pinch the humerus and ignore the spacing issues. That was an accident. Below the shoulder joint and slide the skin away from the muscles like you were taking off tight jeans or pantyhose. So do you see how in the section before she says this doesn't feel ominous or disconnected, and then she is literally talking about the idea of disconnecting the skin of the bird from the bones of the bird. Okay, so it's those kind of connections that you're kind of seeing when you're braiding the essay together. I'm giving this to you to keep, so that if you're feeling stuck and you're like, I'm not sure how to do this braid, you now have the braided essay in your packets called the Braided Heart Essay. You have How to Skin a Bird, and then you have the one about Vietnam, and all three of those are braided essays, so you can use those as examples. But I want to give you a minute now. I want to give you 15 minutes before I tell you about the next thing to try to start braiding your essays together. So open up a new Google Doc. And make sure you know this is your final draft. So you can call it that on the Google Doc if you want. But I think it is so much easier to start with a clean, fresh Google Doc than to try to do this in the files that you already have. And you can start with the research portion or the personal portion, whichever you think is a stronger start. So in mine, my pair story here, I decided it made more sense to start with the research section. So let's first get it into MLA. Put my name, put my date, one space, put my title, one space, started my story in double space. Before you turn in that final draft, make sure you give it a good title. I'm not saying mine is the very best, but some of yours were titled title, or they were titled braided essay. Give it a good title. Okay, so I started mine with the research. I said, well, other punk bands from the early days of the movement in the 1970s might insist that punk is dead. AFI has been alive and kicking for almost 30 years. I changed the focus of my research. Lead singer Davey Havoc, what a name, started the band with his friends in 1991 before any of the band members knew how to play their instruments, but lack of ability didn't matter to a movement that prized the damn the man anti-corporate ethos. In fact, AFI gained street cred in their Northern California neighborhood because of the absence of talent and the unrelenting blast of noise on their first EP, Dork. Okay, then I've got my page break here, my dinkus, and I've put the stars in the middle. And then I'm starting in on my personal story. So I just cut and paste how these are going together. And my connecting thread right here is AFI and drowning. I should not have, I don't know. We'll see if I like that. And I've got AFI and blasting right here. So in both, I'm talking about loud noises, and that's how I've kind of decided where to create that break. All right, I'm gonna give you 15 minutes to work on this. And if you're feeling totally lost, come talk to me. I can see if I can help. So I think one thing is this idea of showing, not telling. And that might be something you've heard before when your teachers have told you about creative writing, but it is like anything that you can show with something physical, either a plot point or a character detail or a sensory experience, that's going to be more powerful often than just telling people what they should notice. So if I wrote show, not tell in your paper, or even if I didn't, think about this idea. So I've got my paragraph about sitting in the car, about wind blowing in our hair, we've got Liberty spikes and so on. I wrote a paragraph that I don't mean to be rude with this, but was more telling instead of showing. And I noticed this a lot in your work. So I want you to see the difference here. I say, as we were driving in the car, I was really excited and nervous about what the night would be like. I really liked this boy named Jeff who was in the car with me, and I wanted him to like me too. Last year, Jeff had liked Julie, but it didn't seem like he liked her anymore. So I thought there might be a chance for he and I to date. I really liked the music we were listening to. It was hard and fast, and I liked how it drowned out any of my nervousness. When loud music was on, I didn't have a chance to think about all the awkward things I might say and do. I was worried about sneaking out of my parents' house so late at night. They were really strict about curfews, and if they knew I had snuck out, they'd be really mad at me. Last week, my dad had told me that if I couldn't get home before curfew, I'd be grounded. I really didn't want to be grounded because if I was grounded, I wouldn't be able to spend as much time with Jeff. Okay, so I'm talking a lot about my emotions here, right? But I want you to see in my written section, and I'm not saying this is the best ever, but I'm trying to show, not tell. I want you to see how I am doing that. So here I say I was really excited and nervous about what the night would be like. I look here and I look at this. We are crammed inside a white geoprism. I think that word crammed already kind of conveys a sense of excitement, you know? And I say the music pounds through the stereo. That also has that kind of excitement, drowning out the noise of 5 teenagers trying to scream in falsetto. So I think I get excitement and nervousness just in that image, you know? And then here I say something negative about Julie. Julie has her heater turned up against the cold, a juxtaposition of senses that only she seems to enjoy, but she pays for the car insurance, so she gets final say. So I'm already hinting at this idea that maybe Julie and I are not on the best of terms right now, you know? I kind of do that a little bit. I think in my second intro, I tell more about this idea about worrying about sneaking out of my parents' house at night. And I say, we'd snuck out of our houses on a Tuesday night, a school night, the night before I had a Spanish quiz that I knew I wasn't prepared for, a night that was full of untapped potential for this crew of unruly teenagers. So I'm trying to show that nervousness and excitement without just directly saying, this is how I feel right now. So I think that's one place where everyone's essays could improve a little bit. If you see someplace where you're directly stating emotions, are there different word choices that you could use when you're describing like actual physical things that would convey those emotions without you having to say it out loud? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, I want you to find one spot in your essay where you think you are telling, not showing, and bold it so that you can come back to it later to fix it. Okay, one more thing two more things I want to point out. The research portion, don't be afraid to add in some like interesting details or like storytelling into the research section. It doesn't have to be just dry, these are the facts. You can really convey your emotion and tone about the research just by the way that you write about it. And do you see how I have included in-text citations? Yeah, I cited Wikipedia because I didn't have time and I wrote this in a few minutes. Don't cite Wikipedia, but you want to include your in-text citations in the correct MLA format. So I know you've gotten in-text citation stuff before. Just if you need a refresher on the assignment, I linked to the Purdue OWL and it can show you how to do that. So just make sure you got those citations. If they're a little bit off, we can fix them. But if they're not there at all, I don't know how to fix them. So you want to make sure that they're there. And last thing before I let you work for the rest of the class, which is 15 minutes, but better than nothing. We talked about including a lot of detail in your stories because I wanted you to be able to see how much detail there is. Usually, the first draft I get too little detail. But because we focused on it so much in these drafts, I often got too much detail. So when you wrote too much detail, a lot of times to the side, I would write, what are you wanting the reader to understand about this moment? And that might mean that you're cutting back on some of that detail so that the story keeps our interest. So if it's not important that it was winter, then you can cut out that it was winter, right? Or if it's not important what time you woke up in the morning, if that doesn't really affect how we're going to see the story, you can go ahead and cut that out now. Ultimately, your papers they need to be at least 5 pages double spaced total. And I think everyone was over 5 pages. So you've got room to cut it back. For the contest, it can't be longer than 10 pages double spaced. So for the contest, it's got to be shorter than 10 pages. And I want to make sure this next draft that you turn in is shorter than those 10 pages. So between 5 and 10 pages for your essays. Okay, any questions now that apply to everyone? And personal questions, I can come talk to you about yours. Yes. I'm going to give you a little bit more feedback after this last one before we submit it to the contest, but not as much as I did this time. The contest is the Scholastic Art and Writing Contest that we are all going to submit our essays to so that hopefully we can get some winners. Huh?
Yeah, what's the prize?
They choose a ton of winners, so there's only a prize for a few people. But I think if you get, I want to say first place is $1,000, second and third is $500. I think so. While you guys are working for the next 15 minutes, I think it's just cash. Yeah. While you're working, I will look up and see what you win. But yeah. But there are a ton of winners that they don't win money, but they win just the opportunity to say, I won this contest, which is awesome for Sterling Scholar Awards, for scholarships, for other scholarships, for resumes and all of that. So there's those kind of bragging rights. Scholastic Art and Writing Contest. Yeah, but we're just doing it. But that's what yeah. No, it's like we are only competing in the category of personal narrative.
Let's go.
Okay, any other general questions for the class? All right, awesome. Keep working then.
No, just buy it.
Buy what?
Just go buy it.